the perspective that I bring to this, which is very different, is trying to look at how the system works and what the impact of fragmentation is on the performance of the system from end to end. So to try and pick up the end-to-end costs, however you might want to measure them, of in effect transferring a security from one investor, one owner, to getting it to the other person through all of those infrastructures, all of those venues, all of the activity that is taking place inside. And just to give you one example from the work we've recently done for the European Commission, and it's a relatively trivial example, one of the phenomena that comes out of that analysis across Europe is that over the past, whatever it is, 3 or 4 years, 2006 I think is the base data, the average transaction size has been rapidly decreasing. The average transaction cost has been decreasing, but when you measure the transaction cost in basis points in certain financial centres, it's been going up and not going down. So if you look at this from an end consumer perspective, you say, right, well, what is it that I want to have done? Well, I want to transfer this security from one person to another. What am I interested in? Well, I'm interested in actually the cost of that measured in basis points, the total cost. This doesn't look like a particularly good outcome.
But the collaborative ideas and the interoperability ideas, how are they going to emerge? Who's going to do? Is Citi going to do that? Is UBS going to do that?
I mean, Citi will not step in and run an infrastructure. We absolutely don't think commercial banks should run that. They should be market-led. But I think there's a couple of points around the issue you raised. First, at the front end, right at the front end, the requirements to list on different exchanges in different markets means that there is complexity throughout. And if we compare to the US market, to the European market, the velocity of throughput and the post-trade, the velocity of throughput is higher and the post-trade is simpler because the listing arrangements are the same. So there's one thing there that sits there, and that is a very, very politically sensitive issue, that we can't get standard listings. Countries do not want to give up their exchanges and consolidate in France, London, Germany, wherever it may be. So that first thing I think's out there. The second is this sort of cooperation, and I quite like the spaghettification of the system. I think really the regulation and oversight has led to things like T2S, and I sort of agree with Tom Zeeb, who said earlier that is T2S actually addressing what we wanted it to address? It's doing settlement. Settlement's the easy bit. It's the corporate events that's the difficult bit. And what we've put into the system as we try to do T2S, look at interoperability, is we are stressing that infrastructure. All of those are going to have to change. All the CSDs are going to have to change over the next years. All the central counterparties will have to change for interoperability. And the systemic risk that we're adding, and we're actually reducing the income stream for those infrastructures, I think gives us a pretty significant systemic risk and could increase cost. It's quite interesting to see that in the last 8 weeks we've had 3 pretty substantial fails in Europe, Middle East. Turkey Central Bank, we had an issue with the CSD in Italy, we also had an issue with the bridge between Clearstream and Euroclear, all within 3 weeks of each other. And that's without all of them to do with system changes, and that's without them really getting into line with T2S. So my concern on this is that as we try and cooperate, we actually are adding more costs and we're adding more systemic risk. But the long-term vision has got to be there, that we've got to somehow pull together that post-trade infrastructure and get more efficiency at the back end. I'm not sure we're going to win the front end one listing requirement in Europe. So we are where we are. So that's my view.
Okay. Well, you were trying to pick up on something there.
A couple of pointers that came up. I think with fragmentation, it's almost accepted infrastructure cost is going to go up. That's almost by definition because you have a lot more infrastructure components to deal with. And you're trying to find ways to contain that. One way to contain that is to have it a shared cost. Every bank, instead of doing it by himself, outsources it to a community, and we say we all connect, and the idea is to share the infrastructure costs between us. Now, if the competitive edge is I have connectivity to places other banks don't, it's counter to that, but in many cases, it probably offsets with the fact that there is so much infrastructure that's required nowadays. Outsourcing has become a norm, and you look at other assets, it's pretty standard. The other component is when you build this infrastructure, how do you get everyone to play? Because you're not going to leverage on FIX being a clearing interface because it's not in that space. Everyone's got their own standards, and you have to deal with that. What happens, and again, and it's how it started in the OTC markets, and I very much look at equities as becoming more and more OTC in its behavior post-trade rather than the other way around. You look at the fact that you want to normalize everyone to a standard and say, carry on doing what you're doing. We'll just translate everything to this repository. And in the repository, you can look, and everyone's going to behave the same. But internal, not every single entity has to go through a big IT project saying, we're going to adopt a standard, and that standard is going to be all-encompassing.
Because you're doing some work with the European Commission, do you? Because a lot of this has come through regulations and different regulators in different countries and different parts of the world even nowadays. Do you get the impression that they understand some of these questions?
They understand some of them. I mean, I think there's actually a much more fundamental problem with this whole space. And it's almost to do with the models of how markets are supposed to work being applied by regulators and others. And one facet of that is if you think about a discussion which says, I've got multiple places to do these multiple things, and it's complicated and incurs a whole lot of cost, there's a missing piece of data. And they are all monopolies, i.e. if I want to do this particular thing, I have to go to that one venue, then this multiplication of being able to do what appears to be the same thing has no competitive dynamic whatsoever. It's pure inefficiency. If on the other hand, I've got these multiple venues and and they are competing with each other in the proper sense of competition, then that dynamic will most of the time produce benefits. So just looking at a kind of structure which has lots of spaghetti in it almost doesn't tell you enough. You have to understand the dynamic, the real competitive dynamic. And I think this is where some of the regulation goes wrong, because the dynamic that they are applying is a much more conventional market type analysis.
Peter Randall from Equiduct. Fascinating, great discussion, very, very interesting. The question, though, is that there seems to be a kind of assumption that this is a static model. And of course, it isn't a static model because various actors within the model are changing their behaviour. And one of the most interesting things I see happening now at this point in the cycle is that the stock exchanges, which were previously have been competed with very successfully by new entrants, have started to change their business model, and in particular on the market data side, are really changing the foundations, if you will, of market data, which is used throughout the system, and they're changing the dynamic of that. Now, I just kind of wonder when Michael talks about his post-trade analysis and Jonathan from Oxera speaks about the work they did. Very, very often, when the chips are down and you really push on this sort of thing, most people ignore market data. And market data can't be ignored because there are so very, very many uses for it, one. And secondly, perhaps more importantly, there are so many different models that are used. And I think it really does confuse things to have this. I mean, the LSE have just launched this thing, the non-displayed data usage system, which is, all right, we're just going to charge you. And we're not going to tell you what for and how much, but we are going to charge you. And you've got to tell us how much you use. Well, come on, these guys are very clever, and that will change a lot of these interoperability conversations.
But that's also coming from a different end as well. I spent years working for a newsletter called Inside Market Data, and one of the things that we 20 years ago were writing about was the Bloombergs and the Reuters, the RIC codes, the exchange codes, and the whole market data, and then the reference data industry grew up around that. And we're still, I mean, if you're at SIFMA, you probably were recently talking about LEIs. How far, and it's taken not just the market data, the pressure on the market data originators like the exchanges. It's taken legislation. It's taken the US Treasury to come along and say, well, actually, we'd really like to have an LEI, please. And they've had to turn not to the exchanges, but to SWIFT, an external body, and impose that through ISO standards. So we'll come back on that. So I said I didn't have as many opinions as Ruben, but on that subject, I probably have. But it also goes, yes, just to take your point to the panel, so you're saying, yes, it's a dynamic thing. Are you saying we're really talking about how different factors within this dynamic ecosystem that we're talking about, such as opportunities with market data? Because presumably on your originating listings, and that's a market data issue, isn't it?
Well, you can call consolidated tape, listing, market data. I think you're absolutely right. You know, it's sort of like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. As soon as you start to measure something, you change the thing you're measuring, and that's exactly what happens. You push a commercial organisation, be it user-owned and governed or listed on the stock exchange, they've got to pay their staff, they've got to find a way to make business, they've got to look for innovative things. I do think we as users have got to be harder and more disciplined about how we demand our providers, infrastructures to provide services to us, and knowing the broker-dealer community as well as I do, they're not normally shy on this stuff. So, but I agree, it's the end-to-end process that's got to be there. So I would say market data is one key point that is going to continually evolve and change, and actually is going to be a key differentiator for the whole market. Chi-X, boat, you know, all those issues we helped change with MiFID as a stimulant, but it was actually the businesses that changed the fundamental market. And I think post-trade's about to go through that. So it's the business drivers that will drive change, not regulation. They're just a factor of resources. Sorry.
My question here is that we see this very much European tsunami of regulation and things like that, and we also understand that the users are very fast movers, right? And they can move very quickly from one side to the other if they wish that fits their business model. So my question to the panel is that, you know, how much are we actually spending on Europe and fragmentation versus the other continent and competitiveness around the world?
That's a very. Does anybody actually know the answer to that?
Well, I can just say from Citi's perspective, in particularly the sub-custody space, what we've found is actually Europe is a test bed for models going global. So, for example, Chi-East, which is opening up in Asia, we've helped LCH, London Clearing House, set up the settlement process in Asia for pan-regional settlement. So we've taken what's happened in Europe and tried to innovate out there. Our broker-dealer clients particularly want those trading and netting and the reduction in costs. So we've found actually the investment that we've done in Europe to date has helped us design products for both Asia and Latin America. So we see that as a way, a sort of innovation platform. And you know, the product managers tend to now sit in Europe and manage that as the subject matter expert in clearance or settlement globally. So that's how we see it, and we see very much Europe is driving change, because that pan-regional governance but still having that jurisdictional issue, other areas are flirting with that, but they haven't got the 30 years of European experience. So